نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد رسوله النبي الأمين المكين الحنين الكريم الرؤوف الرحيم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإلى الله ترجع الأمور صدق الله مولانا العظيم. Respected viewers and listeners, we are beginning a series on the life and the teachings of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi, Mawlana Rumi, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. In this segment, we will look at his life, his biography, the political environment in which he was raised. We will look at the life and the travels of his father, the family's migration from their home city toward the city where they resided, and we will discuss the social surroundings in which Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiyallahu anhu was brought up. He formed his traditions, he formed his ideas, and he formed the concepts which later helped him fashion one of the most glorious pieces of mystical poetry, the Mathnawi Ma'nawi. In the next few segments, we will attempt to cover most of the concepts and themes of the Mathnawi of Mawlana Rumi radiyallahu anhu. Respected viewers and listeners, Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiyallahu anhu, he is a highly respected figure both in Eastern tradition but also in Western tradition. He is known as the poet of the heart, a fountain of love, a source of divine connection. However, I must say that most people have attributed Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiyallahu anhu to mere inner feelings, inner emotions, inner passions, and the inner workings of the heart pertaining to this world, to relations, to happenings, to moments in this temporal world. But I would argue that Mawlana Rumi radiyallahu anhu, in his magnanimous work, the Mathnawi, is not talking about the inner feelings, the inner passions, the inner emotions pertaining to this world, to this dunya, to this temporal world. Rather, I would say that Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiyallahu anhu, he is speaking about another world, another dimension, another kingdom, another universe. And this dimension, this kingdom, and this universe is a place much, much beyond space and time. Above this universe, this is the place where we all originate from. and where we shall all return. There is a fundamental and central concept of circular unity. This is an undercurrent, an underlying theme in the teachings of Mawlana Rumi, that we should all return to our origin. And those who prepare for this journey back to our origin and to our Creator are those who truly thrive and flourish. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala therefore says, وَإِلَى اللَّهِ تُرْجَعُ الْأُمُورِ, that everything shall return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we are constantly heading toward our final end. And those who realize this world understand the secrets and the realities that the Divine Allah Almighty has set forth for us. We begin by looking at the life of the father of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi. He was the Sultan al-Ulama. He was a great proponent of the classical sciences of Islam, the classical traditions from Usul al-Kalam to Usul al-Hadith to Tafsir to Qanun. And this was Sultan al-Ulama, Sayyidina Bahauddin Walad. He was a well-respected, honored and revered individual. And just as he was well versed in the traditional and classical sciences, Sultan Bahauddin Walad was also a scientist of the heart, of ma'rifah, of haqiqah, and the inner secrets of the heart. And therefore, Mawlana Rumi radiallahu anhu, he inherited both sets of sciences from his blessed father, both the classical sciences and also the spiritual sciences. Sultan al-Ulama, Bahauddin Walad, he was born in 1152 AD and he passed away in 1231 AD. And he resided in a city called Balkh, which is in modern day Afghanistan. Balkh was the capital at the time of the Khwarizmi Empire, whose ruler at the time of Sultan al-Ulama was Alauddin Muhammad Khwarizm Shah. Before going into the life of Sultan al-Ulama and Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi, why don't we look at the political environment at the time? The great empires which clashed and which took over each other's lands, and the political struggle and strife that set the stage and scene for the emergence of the fountain of love, Mawlana Rumi radiallahu anhu. In essence, in the 11th century, certain Turkic tribes migrated through the Transoxiana region and began settling in northern Iran and eastern Iran, migrating from the Anatolian regions. And these include the Ghaznavids, the Qarakhanids, the Seljuks, and a branch of the Turkoman clan Kinnik, among them the Ughuz and the Khwarizms. And the Khwarizmis established their rule and kingdom in Balkh in Tabrez, in Bukhara, in Samarkand. The Ghaznavis had established rule in kingdom in these areas, but also in certain areas of the Indian subcontinent. However, as a result of a political and military clash with the Ghauris, in English terms the Ghurids of the time, the Ghaznavids were forced to leave the lands in the Indian subcontinent and their cities in northern and eastern Iran, as a result of which the Ghauris became supreme rulers of the area and the region. However, Shihabuddin Ghauri and his followers and his rule wasn't very popular in the subcontinent and also in Iran, so he was overruled and his lands were also taken over, and Shihabuddin Ghauri was eventually assassinated. So in this period, Alauddin Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, he saw an opportunity to take over the lands that the Ghaznavis and the Ghauris had left, and they included Balkh, Tabrez, Bukhara, Samarkand. And when Alauddin Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, he invaded Balkh, Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid radiallahu anhu, some historical manuscripts, they indicate that he may have been present at the time and he witnessed the slaughtering of thousands upon thousands of citizens of the city of Balkh. So as a result of witnessing this violence, Sultan al-Ulama and his son Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, their family and a massive contingent of scholars migrated from Balkh to a nearby town called Waksh. And they resided there from approximately 1203 to 1210 AD. As a result of Khwarizm Shah's violence and his oppression upon the populace of Balkh. However, eventually Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid and Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, they returned back to Balkh for another 5 to 7 years. In this period, Khwarizm Shah, he started to sit in the circles of knowledge of Sultan Bahauddin Walid. He began listening to his sermons, his lectures, his talks, his addresses on spirituality, on mysticism and tasawwuf. And he became impressed and he was drawn to the great scholar. But in time, certain other rationalists and philosophical scholars of Khwarizm Shah's court, they began to bear certain envy and jealousy towards Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid. They started to convince Khwarizm Shah that Sultan al-Ulama, he has left the orthodoxy and the tradition of Islamic sciences, and that Khwarizm Shah must push Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid out of his kingdom, force him out. In this period, Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid, he enjoyed the time of Imam Fakhruddin Razi radiallahu anhu. It was both mutual admiration, mutual respect and reverence, and there were certain differences on some core principles of classical sciences. Now one day, both because of the envy and the insistence of certain classical rationalist scholars, Alauddin Khwarizm Shah, he began to change his mind about Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid. The first reason was the convincing of the scholars and their envy and jealousy. And the second reason is when he saw masses upon masses, seas upon seas of people joining the circles of knowledge of Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid as king, as emperor, as ruler, he started to become envious and jealous himself. It is a natural phenomenon when political rulers see certain personalities in their own jurisdiction, in their own sovereignty, who are becoming popular, who are being recognized, and people are swarming them, surrounding them, and they have magnetic and charismatic force. Emperors, rulers, and political elites, they become envious and insecure. So as a result of this insecurity, Huzur Sayyidi Shaykhul Islam mentions that Alauddin Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, on one occasion, he sent someone toward Sultan Bahauddin Walid with the keys of his treasury, with a message saying, "This is all I have left, you can take this as well." And Sultan Bahauddin Walid was very intelligent, he was very sharp, and he understood the message that the ruler and the king Khwarizm Shah now no longer has room in his heart for me, and he's bearing envy. And so out of his dignity and his honor, Sultan Bahauddin Walid, alongside his son Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, and approximately 300 scholars of the time, migrated from Balkh to Baghdad Sharif via Nishapur. Respected viewers and listeners, we will address this part of the story, the migration and the travels of Sultan Bahauddin Walid and Mawlana Rumi radiallahu anh. But I'd like to quickly track back and look at the political situation. The Khwarizmi Empire was in essence affiliated, partnered with the Seljuk Empire of the time, a great Turkic empire of Islamic civilization. They ruled a massive region in eastern northern Iran, in Anatolia, and for decades upon decades, more than a century, they secured these lands and they ruled. Alauddin Khwarizm Shah was the son of Tekish, who was the son of Arsalan, and Arsalan declared his independence from the Seljuk Empire. Before that, the Khwarizmis and the Seljuks were affiliated and partnered. The Khwarizmis were in essence under the patronage of the Seljuks. Arsalan was the son of Atsiz, and Atsiz was loyal to a great ruler known as Sanjar of the Seljuk Empire. Sultan Alauddin Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, he's a very important and central figure in political history in Islam, because as of his diplomatic and political mistakes and miscalculations, one of the greatest waves of oppression, calamity, and disasters fell upon Islamic civilization and Islamic history. And I will tell you why. Khwarizm Shah Alauddin Muhammad, as a ruler, when he invaded Balkh, Samarkand, Bukhara, Tirmidh, he became more ambitious. He wanted to control more cities and more lands vast regions of the area where he resided. And his mother had told him that you must humble your ambitions. For as a result of your exaggerated ambitions, you shall lose your seat. He did not listen to his mother, and he set his eyes on other cities, other empires of Islamic civilization. So in 1218, at the same time, the Mongol Empire, Genghis Khan, he had taken over Peking in what is known as modern-day China, and he had taken control of the Chinese region. And he now sought to use the Silk Road to begin trade with the rest of the world. And so Khwarizm Shah came in the way. And so he sent trade emissaries and diplomats and ambassadors to Khwarizm Shah to establish political connection, diplomatic accord, and to also trade with the Khwarizmi Empire. Initially, Khwarizm Shah agreed. He established cordial diplomatic relations. He traded with Genghis Khan, and for 2 years between 1218 and 1220 AD, the Khwarizmi Empire and the Mongol Empire, they were on diplomatic terms and they traded. They had economic relations and things were running smoothly. And so, this is my hypothesis. If matters had been running smoothly, it is possible that the Mongolian Empire would not have invaded, sacked and massacred Islamic cities in various Islamic empires in the next coming decades. However, a massive mistake cost Khwarizm Shah and also neighboring Muslim cities and empires. Genghis Khan sent a trade emissary, a diplomatic mission, and Khwarizm Shah's relative Inaljik, the governor of Urtar, a neighboring city of Balkh, he stopped the trade emissary and the diplomats, he captured them and he killed some. Now this enraged Genghis Khan, who said to Khwarizm Shah that either you return Inaljik to me and I'll punish him, or you punish him yourself and we can call things settled. But Khwarizm Shah, as I mentioned earlier, he was becoming more ambitious and he wanted to capture more lands. He miscalculated the strength, the conviction and the power and the vengeance of the Mongolian Empire and Genghis Khan. And he said, no, I will not punish him and I will not hand over Inaljik to you either. As a result, Genghis Khan, he became furious, enraged, and the spirit of vengeance arose. And so he pushed his army towards the Khwarizmi Empire, as a result, costing the Khwarizmi Empire hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of people, but also the Abbasids and neighboring empires and cities of Islamic civilization, millions of people and innocent citizens. This one political mistake, diplomatic miscalculation, put Islamic civilization back many hundred years. And so Genghis Khan's forces, they sacked and massacred people in Balkh, Samarkand, Bukhara, Tirmidh, and eventually in 1258, widely known as the sack of Baghdad, conquering Baghdad, massacring hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians, raiding Baytul Hikmah, the great Islamic library and center of research and development, burning thousands upon thousands of manuscript and books which contained hundreds of years of research, of knowledge and wisdom that had been accumulated in Islamic empire and civilization. And then Halaku Khan, they took over Baghdad, Damascus, Aleppo, and they were stopped by the Mamluks, by Qutuz and Baybars in 1260 AD at the Battle of Ain Jalut. And had the Mamluks not stopped the Mongolian Empire, they would have proceeded towards Jerusalem and Makkatul Mukarramah and al-Madinatul Munawwara possibly. So Khwarizm Shah, his ambition cost him his empire. Khwarizmi Empire declined and it completely withered away. And also his personal envy cost him the presence of Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid and his son, the great Mawlana Rumi radiallahu anhu. This is a lesson for political rulers, those in charge, those in governance. You must check your ambition. You must be modest in your approach. And you must be shrewd and sharp in your calculations. Respected viewers and listeners, looking back at the migration and travels of Sultan Bahauddin Walid and Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, once they left Balkh, they first travelled to Naishapur. And in Naishapur, as a very young boy, Sayyidina Fariduddin Attar radiallahu anhu, the author of Tazkiratul Awliya, he was present and he met Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid and his son Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi. And he said to Sultan al-Ulama, O Imam, O Sultan, please look after your son. I see a shining star on his forehead. I can see wisdom, knowledge, and fountains of divine love which shall gush from him in the near future. So protect him. This was the spiritual foresight of Sayyidina Fariduddin Attar radiallahu anhu, who met Sultan al-Ulama and Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi on the way. What I'm about to mention and what I shall mention in terms of historical references, they are mostly accumulated from the most fundamental sources pertaining to the life of Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid and Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu. And they are firstly the Ma'arif, a book of Sultan Bahauddin Walid, his own account of his travels and his life. Secondly, the Ibtida Nama of Sultan Walid, which is the eldest son of Mawlana Rum radiallahu anhu. He wrote about the life of Mawlana Rumi, his grandfather Sultan al-Ulama, and he noted certain details which he learnt from his elders about their migration, their travels. And then two other contemporaries of Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, Sipah Salar and Ahmad Aflaki. These are the most authentic sources pertaining to Sultan al-Ulama and Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi. And so from Naishapur, they traveled to Baghdad. And when they reached the gate of Baghdad, the gatekeeper asked, "Who are you?" And when they introduced themselves, the gatekeeper went and fetched another great scholar and author of the book Awariful Ma'arif, Shaykh Shihabuddin Suhrawardi radiallahu anhu. Shaykh Shihabuddin Suhrawardi radiallahu anhu had heard about Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid. And so he received him at the gate and he brought him towards his lodgings. And when he informed the Caliph of the Abbasid Empire at the time, Al-Nasir Lidinillah, they hosted Sultan al-Ulama, Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi for a while. But Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid, due to his dignity and his ghairah and his honor, he did not take well to political courts and rulers, and he refrained from their presence and their court and their majlis, and instead he spent his time teaching, disseminating knowledge. And it is also mentioned that he spent time in the presence of certain disciples, initial disciples of Shaykh al-Qadri Jilani radiallahu ta'ala an. So the people and the followers of the tariqah of Qadiriyya and the disciples of Shaykh al-Qadri Jilani radiallahu an, they met Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid and they spent time together. And then they travelled towards Makkah al-Mukarramah and al-Madinah al-Munawwara, and eventually travelling towards Dimashq. And Huzur Sayyidi Shaykhul Islam says at this point, Shaykh al-Akbar Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi radiallahu anh, great saint and mystic of his time, when he met Sultan Bahauddin Walid, Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, he famously said that a sea is following a lake, which is to say that although Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh was young and tender in age, but Sayyidina Ibn Arabi radiallahu anh, his spiritual foresight and wisdom had informed him of the great fountains and seas of love, wisdom and ma'rifah that would have gushed from Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, his life, his teachings, his sermons and his works in the future. In age, Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid, in stature, he was elder, he was the father, but this was Shaykh al-Akbar's remarks regarding Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh. And then from Dimashq, the family proceeded to reside in Isfanjan for 3 to 4 years, and then Karaman, which is near Konya, for approximately 3 years. In this time, the Mongolians were pushing upon the Seljuk Empire, and so the safest place to reside was the capital of the Seljuk Empire at the time, and this was Konya. And the ruler of Konya at the time was Alauddin Kaykubat. He was a sultan. And when Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid was residing in Karaman, he heard about Sultan Bahauddin Walid, and so he invited him to reside in Konya. So in 1228 AD, invitation was sent, and the invitation was accepted by Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid. And so for approximately 3 years before his passing away, in 1231 AD, Sultan al-Ulama resided in Konya. And instead of going toward the court of Sultan Alauddin Kaykubat, Sultan al-Ulama went directly to the biggest madrasa, the institution, an educational institution at the time. And again, he taught there for a few years before passing away. When Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walid radiallahu anh passed away in 1231, Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, he was only approximately 24 to 25 years. Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, respected viewers and listeners, we can look at his life now. He was born in 1207 AD and he passed away in 1273 AD. And he wrote his Mathnawi between 1258 to 1273 AD. And he met his great teacher and spiritual mentor, Sultan Shamsuddin Tabrezi, in 1244 AD. and he departed in 1247 AD. For 3 years they enjoyed each other's company. Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, Mawlana Rumi, the great mystic and saint, the spiritualist, a source of divine love, wisdom, gnosis. He was known as Khudawandigar, someone who in his nature, in his disposition was divinely and heavenly. Someone who it felt had emerged from the divine kingdoms and heaven. The attributes, the characteristics and the traits which emerged from his life, his personality, his teachings, reminded you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was born in the neighboring town of Balkh, known as Waqsh, and one of his titles therefore was Balkhi, as well as Rumi when he later moved to Konya. And his pen name was Khamush. In his disposition, therefore, you can presume there was a great degree of contemplation, a great degree of silence. And if you visit the grave and the mazar of Mawlana Rumi radiallahu anhu, the place where you enter physically as visitors right now, right in front of the dome of Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu's mazar, and before the entrance where people enter, there's a gate called Bab-e Khamoshan, the gate of the silent ones, those who out of their respect and reverence enter the presence of Mawlana Rumi in silence, just as Mawlana Rumi had practiced silence in the sight, in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout his life. And this silence is spiritual. A spiritual saint may speak, they may talk, they may teach and give you pearls of wisdom. Physically they are speaking, but in their heart there is great seclusion and silence where these pearls of wisdom emerge and they form. After the passing away of his father, Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walad, Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, he was placed under the tutelage, the guardianship and the tutoring of one of the great students of Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walad, Sayyidina Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq. Sayyidina Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq, great muhaddith and scholar, he had remained in Balkh to assume the post of Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walad, to replace him while they travelled and migrated towards Konya. Sultan al-Ulama Bahauddin Walad, he came in the dream of Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq and he said, "O Burhanuddin, have you abandoned my son? He needs teaching. He needs higher education. So I command you to travel from Balkh now to Konya." And so Sayyidina Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq, adhering to the command of his great teacher, he travelled toward Konya and he assumed charge of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, his education, both his classical Islamic sciences but also spiritual sciences. And Sayyidina Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq taught Mawlana Rumi within those 9 years. He also sent Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu back to Damascus and back to Aleppo for further higher Islamic classical sciences. And Burhanuddin Muhakkik, he passed away in 1246, and in 1240 he moved to a neighboring city called Qaisari. So for a period of 4 years, Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi did not have a teacher. This is the context in which the great spiritual mentor of Mawlana Rumi emerged in his life. For 4 years, he did not have a teacher, a spiritual mentor, a guide, a source of light and wisdom, losing his father, and then his teacher, Sayyidina Burhanuddin Muhakkik, traveling to Qaisari. In this period, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and through His divine command, arranged a replacement. So in 1244, Sultan Shams Tabrez radiallahu anhu, he emerged in the life of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu. Now Sultan Shams Tabrez, his name was Shamsuddin bin Ali bin Maliktad. And if there is any confusion and any doubt as to his personality, as to his intellectual orientation, there are certain confusions and misunderstandings. Some believe that he is merely a dervish, a spiritualist, or someone who is purely a mystic and unknown to the classical and traditional Islamic sciences. However, this is not true. Sultan Shams Tabrez was a scholar. He spent his time in the presence of great scholars of Damascus, of Dimashq and Halab, Aleppo. He learnt the classical sciences. However, from a very young age, he displayed certain mystic traits, certain spiritual characteristics, and greatness from a very young age. And he mentions in his own maqalat, his own book, that at a very young age, I used to perform certain spiritual occurrences. Happenings used to come from my presence. Even my father was shocked and he wouldn't understand. And so, in 1244, on the 23rd of October, Sayyidina Shamsuddin Tabrez radiallahu anhu, he comes to Konya and he meets Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu. Now there are 4 narrations according to Huzur Sayyidi Shaykhul Islam as to their meeting. Either these 4 narrations are 4 accounts of the same event, or it is possible that they are 4 narrations describing 4 different events. Both possibilities exist. In the first narration, Sultan Shams Tabrez, he was the student of Shaykh Kamaluddin Jund. Shaykh Kamaluddin Jund, after training Sultan Shams Tabrez in the classical sciences and passing him through the stages of spiritual sciences and tasawwuf, said, now you have learnt the way of ma'rifah and the way that leads to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said to Sultan Shams Tabrez that your heart has burnt in the love of divine Allah Almighty. It has burnt in the search for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The flames and the fire of love have erupted in your heart. Now it is necessary that you transfer this flame and this fire of love towards someone else, towards someone worthy, towards someone capable. And so, Shaykh Kamaluddin Jund, he ordered Sultan Shams Tabrez to travel to Konya, and he said, there is a burnt-hearted man whose heart yearns for ma'rifah and recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So go toward him and teach him. This is the first narration. And the second narration is that Sultan Shams Tabrez was once in muraqabah, in spiritual reflection and contemplation. And in that muraqabah, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "O Allah, grant me someone who is worthy and capable enough of consuming and absorbing my spiritual sight and my tawajjuh. Someone who I can transfer my spiritual wisdom, the flames and the fire of divine love, divine recognition, ma'rifah, wisdom, the pearls and the jewels of ma'rifah and hikmah." And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He granted an indication to Sultan Shams Tabrez, go to Rum, there is someone waiting for you. And so Sultan Shams Tabrez travels towards Konya and stays in Karwan Sarai, in a lodging, and eventually finds Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiyallahu anhu. In the third narration, this is perhaps one of the most widely recognized narrations. Sultan Shams Tabrez, he was a scholar, a traveler. They used to call him in Persian Shamse Parinde, the flying sun. That wherever he traveled like a bird, and he illuminated the place where he traveled. He was traveling and he reached Konya, and like the saints of the past, whenever they reached a city, they inquired about the most eminent personality and scholar and saintly and righteous person. And they heard about Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu. He found Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu teaching his students and disciples in his madrasa, in his school. And he saw that there were numerous books piled around Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu. And he observed the teaching of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi. And after a while, he approached Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi and he said to him, "Ee cheez, what is this?" And as Mawlana Rumi was teaching, he looked at Sultan Shams Tabrez and he saw a traveler, a merchant, an ordinary man, and he said, "Ye aan cheez ast ke tu na dani." This is something that you do not understand. And after hearing this, Sultan Shams Tabrez became enraged and furious, came into Jalal, and the books, they became alit, and they went on fire, and they lit on flames. All the manuscripts and books of Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi were burning. They were on fire. And in those times, you did not have the printing press. You did not have various copies. You had one copy written by hand on a manuscript. And he feared that my books, a lifetime of my knowledge, is now burning. And they had burnt. However, Sultan Shams Tabrez radiallahu anhu, before leaving, he said, "Look at your books." And so when Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, he picked up his books, he saw that although they were burning and they were on fire, but nothing had burnt. The pages were intact, the ink was there, the writing was there, and the books were in the same condition as they had been before being lit on fire. And so Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi then asked, just as Sultan Shams Tabrez asked, "Ye cheest, what is this?" And then Sultan Shams Tabriz responded, "Ye aa cheest as ke tu nadani." Oh, Mawlana, this is something that you do not understand. Just as you did not understand that spiritual occurrence, and you said, "I cannot understand this intellectual occurrence. Why don't we learn from each other?" And so, the life of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, it took a massive turn. A revolution emerged in the heart of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu. Just as the books had been lit on fire, the heart of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi had been lit on fire. The fire of divine love, of divine ishq, divine muhabba, divine ulfa. And this flame had emerged in the heart, this flame which grew and grew and grew. And Sultan Shams Tabriz kept on placing oil upon oil on it until that flame grew, became a fire, and then amassed the personality of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi, and then took over his work, his life, his teachings. And then this fire of divine love is what Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi, Mawlana Rumi, teaches in his Mathnavi. The fourth narration, respected viewers and listeners, Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, he was sitting beside a pond in the courtyard of his madrasa. And there were certain books piled on the ledge of the fountain. Sultan Shams Tabriz, he looked at Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, and he said, "What is this?" And Mawlana Rumi responded, "This is qeel wa qaal. This is what is said, and these are narrations." He said it in a dismissive manner. And so Sultan Shams Tabriz radiallahu anhu, he picked up the books and threw them in the well, in the pond. And again, Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, he was worried. His lifetime of works and teachings and his knowledge were written in ink, and they were all wet and soaking in water. He feared he had lost all of his knowledge in his books. However, when he picked the books up, they were completely dry. So he asked Sultan Shams Tabriz, "What is this?" And Sultan Shams Tabriz responded, "This is alam-e hal. This is a state of ecstasy and divine recognition and ma'rifah." And so this changed the life of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anhu, who then proclaimed that Maulavi hargiz na shud Mawlana Rumi, ta ghulam-e Shams Tabrizi na shud. That Jalaluddin had not become Maulavi until he assumed the servitude and the service of Sultan Shams Tabriz. That until he became a servant and student at the doorstep of Sultan Shams Tabriz radiallahu anhu, he did not assume the great rank and title of being Maulavi, which is a divinely person. And only then, by spending 3 years in the presence of Sultan Shams Tabriz, for 6 months in complete isolation, not leaving their house, not meeting anyone, Sultan Shams Tabriz and Mawlana Rumi sat in front of each other in khalwa and seclusion and taught each other both in silence, and then they discussed various concepts in tasawwuf and in ma'rifah. And then they emerged after 6 months. During this time, some of the students of Mawlana Rumi became envious and jealous of Sultan Shams Tabriz. Who has come and changed the life of our teacher. He has taken our teacher from us. Our teacher no longer offers us his company, his teachings, his wisdom. Who is this person? So they forced Sultan Shams Tabrez to leave, and he left back to Damascus. Mawlana Rumi was very saddened and very grieved. He sent his son, Sultan Walid, and other disciples to convince Sultan Shams Tabrez to return. They eventually found him and they convinced him to return. He stayed for a while, but again, in 1247, then he disappeared. Respected viewers and listeners, Sultan Shamsuddin Tabrezi radiallahu anh, he was the antenna of Sayyidina Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, his connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted his wisdom, his ma'rifah, his gnosis, his hikam through this antenna of Sultan Shamsuddin Tabrezi radiallahu anh. And through this channel, Mawlana Rumi, he emerged in the path of divine love. He emerged on the path of muhabba and ishq. And eventually, years later, he compiled his Mathnawi and wrote couplets, 6 volumes on divine love and divine ishq. And the subject and the theme of the Mathnawi pertains to Allah Almighty, the divine, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fighting our lower self, our cardinal and sensual desires, feeling the emotion of separation and firaq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then embarking on a spiritual journey towards the stages of divine recognition, of fana, annihilation, baqa, subsistence, and then achieving unification, jama' with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Respected viewers and listeners, in the next few segments, we will now embark on the journey of discussing the core themes and the discussions of Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi radiallahu anh, his Mathnawi, and what we can learn, what we can reflect and implement in our lives. وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.